on this episode of Disruptive Discussions. The energy capacity within 1 kilogram of coal is the equivalent of 1/1,000,000th of a gram of uranium.
This is getting like kind of existential. Society tells you like what you need to be happy, right?
But yeah, I think it's the most highly publicized cyber attack from the government, and maybe ever.
I do not use that approach because I think you get in trouble with that. And I like. All right.
Do you know it's amazing how nice those little lineups are?
I picked it up from, there's a podcast, well, I've told you guys about it, the Hello Internet podcast, that they're not doing as of now anymore, which is kind of sad. I know. That's we'll talk about that in a minute.
They stopped Hello Internet.
I know. No, but on one of the episodes, like, CGP Grey was like, all right, I'm going to clap 3 times. Clap, clap, clap. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I found out that's how they line up the audio. So they have like the, the 3 distinct claps on the sound thing. And it's actually quite convenient.
It's quite useful. It is.
So was his whole podcast just like unedited? Like he would just have it from like when they started, like even before they like really got into podcast mode?
No, I think his podcast was, I think he really edits a lot, which I think is partially the reason why they stopped, to be honest, is because I think he was doing a lot of stuff because he runs a YouTube channel too.
Yeah.
And so, but it was so sad because like, I love those episodes because they just like talk about like random, it's like one of those 2 dudes talking podcasts where they literally talk about just whatever, but it's so fun to listen to. And they've been like pretty semi-consistent. I mean, they upload only about once a month, but then like all of a sudden when COVID hit, the episodes like ran out, and because like they're not like super predictable, like sometimes it'll be like 2 months before an episode comes, sometimes it'll be 3 weeks, about the first month goes by and it's like, oh, all right, this one's gonna take a little while, and then another month goes by, and then another month goes by, and then another month goes by, and you're like, what happened, guys? Like, what happened? And I guess they're just taking a break right now. They're all good, but understandable.
Yeah, don't blame them.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Intense.
Well, and those podcasts are like 3 hours long, aren't they? Like,
Yeah.
Did they
Hello
go
Internet's
for that long?
time.
Some of them, yeah. Some of them are like,
I really shouldn't be that surprised. We do an hour and a half, and
Yeah.
it's not really a chore.
yeah, it's pretty,
Yeah.
pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And they even come with like they talk a lot with their, they come with like a lot of show notes too. And so like the show notes are about random stuff that they've already talked about or about whatever, but they have more of an agenda too, which I think adds time to it. Ours is a little more freestyle, which I like, but
Well, if you got to plan the whole thing out, like that is just a tough time. I think arguably my favorite podcast is Hardcore History by Dan Carlin, and like the guy goes all in, man. Like I listened to probably 24 hours consecutively about World War I, where he just went over it, and like there is no fluff in his podcast. It is like reading from a book, except he's just talking about all this information. And so for him, it's like a few months that he'll wait before he drops something new. But
when he drops it, it's like it's
when
a
he
drop,
drops
man.
it, it's like, oh man, like sit back, 5 hours of like high quality history detail. Like this is gonna be good. So
Those are awesome. I recently found a YouTube channel for that sort of thing too. I like to bounce around different topics, mostly just because I get curious, or if I'm doing mundane work, I like to just plug in and listen to something cool. But I think it's Geographics, I think is the name of the channel. And he just spends, 20, it's just 25-minute video on something historical. I remember what was, last night I watched one on the invasion of Cambodia and kind of the decolonization of, stuff that they went through, the war with Vietnam that they had back in the 70s. The other one was on Russian nuclear testing, kind of old school stuff there was some sketchy stuff going on. I mean,
Really?
there obviously, especially
there's always sketchy stuff going
how
on.
Russia
yeah.
did that.
Russia does sketchy stuff?
No
Imagine
way.
that.
Really? Wow.
Really? I think the other one was, did you know that they're building a new nuclear waste disposal site in Norway? I think it's Norway.
The Russians are?
No.
Oh.
Well, the Norwegians are, but they're going to probably charge a boatload of money to have everyone store their nuclear waste there. But
Norwegians.
because, like around here, like we're in Utah.
Yeah.
Very, very close to where they were testing like nuclear stuff back in, trying to develop the full atomic bomb and whatnot over in Nevada, that sort of thing.
The desert.
Yeah, how St. George
Yeah.
has that whole history of being a washover. What is it? There's a term for that, where they used to always get nuclear fallout.
Radiation.
Falling over them.
Radiation poisoning or something. Yeah.
Yeah, how they have a history with that. Yeah, we store a lot of nuclear waste here in Utah. We just don't know what to do with it. So, like, I guess what these guys did, they dug like 500 meters into the ground, and they've got these huge chambers that they're developing to the point where you can store all of your fuel rods, your waste of fuel rods after you cool them down, store them in like steel casings, and then stuff that inside another like big casing, and then stuff that in like a copper tubing to prevent it from deteriorating, and then stuff it in like a ceramic vault,
And then
bury it 500 meters under the ground.
Bury it. Jeez.
Yeah,
Is it
I guess they've got a
that-
whole process they're doing.
Is it that big of a deal to like get rid of nuclear? Like for me, I feel like you just throw it away, man. Like just put it in the trash can.
Just toss it in the ocean. No big deal.
Just put it in the ocean and then it's gone, out of sight, out of mind.
That's
Yeah.
not how radioactive
It's like-
material
like
works.
Those radioactive, those fuel rods are bad news for the environment, man.
It'll stay active
But
for
that's what-
100,000 years
Yeah.
before it's de-radioactive.
Now the problem with that is like now people associate that, like obviously very difficult to dispose of those. They associate that with like, nuclear power is so terrible for the environment. And it's like, well, okay, you got to like look at the scaling of it, because you have like, these fuel rods that's like, these are pretty dangerous, pretty bad. But like for the amount of return on investment you get from a nuclear power plant from those fuel rods is like hundreds of times more than like our current green energy stuff, like solar panels
It's
and
actually
wind power.
almost exactly 1 million times in
Really?
energy capacity. If you took a kilogram of coal and then try to get the energy capacity within 1 kilogram of coal is the equivalent of 1 millionth of a gram of uranium.
Wow.
So if you want to use, you can use 100 million ton of coal or 1 kilogram of uranium to produce the same energy result.
that is nuts.
That is the conversion ratio.
That's a pretty good ROI if you
That's
ask
a pretty
me.
good ROI.
That's a
And
pretty
then
good
for
ROI.
just, let's get one place where we can stuff these things and not have to worry about them later.
Yeah.
Easy money.
Yeah, instead of blowing it into our
Well,
atmosphere.
Yep.
So why are people so afraid of nuclear energy? Because I see things all the time where it's like, oh, I don't know, like Senator so and so supports nuclear energy. We don't want that. Are people just afraid of like Fukushima happening to wherever they live, or is that like? Because I've heard that there's really no other environmental impact unless maybe the entire facility melts down. So is that really all it is?
Unless stuff goes absolutely horribly wrong, then people, that's just because that's the only thing they've heard about it. Like we were having the discussion the other day, just people don't know about this sort of thing. So the only thing that they've read about, heard about, has just been the 3 huge disasters that have had since nuclear power was developed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they hear the word nuclear too, and nuclear is not really a user-friendly, consumer-friendly word to use.
Yeah,
you
about the
know?
only association with it, is with bombs.
with the
So-
bombs and power. Okay, well,
So they think, oh, we're setting off a bomb to make energy.
yeah,
No, that's not how it works.
Quite.
No.
Yeah. No, I view it almost as like, like it's kind of like flying on commercial airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
They're scary if like there's no safety things on them. Like you have this big giant machine, this big piece of metal with jet fuel. You're flying a bunch of people through the air, thousands of feet in the air, and it's like, that freaks people out, but I mean, rarely, very, very, very rarely do plane crashes happen. I mean, they still happen, but I mean, they don't happen enough that it's like, okay, we got to stop using airplanes. I think it's the same with nuclear power, and especially now, I think the safety mechanisms in place are pretty darn substantial at this point to make sure that nothing happens. Now, you could go on kind of a tangent here and talk about like Stuxnet, which is a virus that the U.S. planted in Iranian nuclear power plants. So there's that aspect where somebody could cyber attack a nuclear power plant, but I don't know. I mean, you can cyber attack anything. So,
And even then, like when they like Stuxnet didn't really have a major environmental impact from what I recall. Like it's not like they blew anything up. It's just that the cylinders were just kind of destroyed, so they couldn't be used. Is that correct? Like I don't think I don't think cybercrime could like end up in some major environmental impact, or it hasn't really historically.
well, I mean, it always depends on the actors, I think, because there was a Darknet Diaries episode that I listened to. Maybe you guys listened to it too. I think it was called, I want to say it was called like Titan or something. It was a type of malware that got injected into this. I think it was like a Arabian oil refinery or something.
Oh, Saudi Aramco?
I think so.
I remember that name
Yeah,
being a
the
thing in
world's
the news
largest
last year
company.
or sometime.
At least
Yeah.
it was then.
Yeah. But basically what this malware did is it made all of their safety systems say that everything was okay when in the background it was letting everything loose and dangerous things were happening in the background. And so it was like somebody was like intentionally trying to cause harm and damage. And so I think it depends on the actor. But I mean, I don't know. I think with technology, there's always pros and cons and stuff you have to weigh. And I mean, I think nuclear power, the efficiency that you gain from it. I mean, France uses like, I think like 80 or 90% of their power is from nuclear power.
Is it that much?
It's a lot. Let me look it up. Let me fact check that. But I remember like learning that and I was like, holy cow.
What is this virus you guys just mentioned, though? Because I remember back in the Obama administration, we had the big nuclear deal where they stuffed most of their centrifuges with cement and that sort of thing. But it sounds like you're talking about some sort of cyber attack that we did before that.
Oh, Stuxnet. Dude, Stuxnet is great. And I'm actually not sure like the
Fill me in here, Chief. I'm not sure what
yeah,
this
if
is.
you haven't heard about this, it's probably like the most well-known cyber attack or cyber I guess cyber, not crime, because it was the government. The government kind of defines what crime is, but
Yeah, U.S. government.
Black Ops, my guy. Let's go. Whoops.
But yeah, I think it's the most highly publicized cyber attack from the government, and maybe ever, from what I'm aware of. But essentially, what it was the Iranian power plant, or the Iranian nuclear power plants, operated on the kind of like a closed network system, so you couldn't access them from outside. You had to be internally based to access them. And somehow, I think it was CIA or some intelligence agency.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they got like a USB, somehow stuck it into the system.
Now I do remember you telling me about that a long time ago.
Yeah, and then like the cylinders that like spun. I don't really know the process of nuclear energy, but the cylinders started spinning at like or the wrong rate or like backwards or something like that, and it completely toppled everything, and it just destroyed all of their nuclear capability. Way sick, in my opinion. Like, it's just such an interesting attack. But
Yeah. Now, the one thing that's interesting, we were talking about this in cyber attacks, is that, Stuxnet. Oh, that's hard to say. Stuxnet. Stuxnet was pretty effective in taking down Iran's nuclear power plants. But now, the weird thing about cyber attacks is like when they're discovered, you've given the enemy your weapon. So now the Iranians know, how Stuxnet was done. They have the code for it, which is a weird, when you think about cyber attacks, it's like, oh crap, if they discover this and they decode and figure it out, we can't use it anymore and we have to now defend against it,
That's true. I'm sure it had some sort of failsafe in the back of it as well. Something like a worm where it deletes itself after it moves and migrates.
Yeah.
I'm sure they had something like that too. They don't have the whole puzzle.
I'm sure. But at the same time, I mean, the Iranians, they have some really smart computer scientists too.
That's true. They can reverse engineer it.
They reverse engineer a lot. Mm-hmm. So, but I thought that was interesting. So there you go. Watch out for Stuxnet. Oh, that was a skateboard. I was like,
yeah, I was wondering what was coming up behind us and how that was
Peekaboo.
how that was going to work.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well,
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Caden.
Well, I was going to say cyber attacks are, I always talk about cyber attacks because they're easy to make doomsday scenarios about, but they're really easy to make doomsday scenarios about because the hard part is nobody can see them coming, and nobody is educated, with some kind of physical attack where somebody, blows up a building. that like instills a lot of fear into people. And so we obviously like try super hard to protect against that. With a cyber attack, it's like it doesn't really have as visceral of consequences, like the one that happened with the solar winds attack on the United States. That was the Russia one, I think, right? Where Russia hacked into it was this server company that was manufacturing servers. They basically were able to, through an update, insert a bunch of code into them and infiltrate a lot of different government networks that way. But you hear that and you're like, oh man, that's really bad. But it's like, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't make you afraid. I mean, it's not something where it's like, oh man, like imagine if that happened to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the same time, like when you think about the consequences of cyber attacks, like they can be just as bad in some situations as, you know, some like a plane getting blown up or something. Not nearly as clear to see usually, but I mean, you think about like if I've heard rumors that that we think that the Russians may have hacked into the United States power grid. And you guys probably can talk more about that. But, I mean, you think about all the implications there. You know, you turn off all traffic lights and, you know, all of a sudden car wrecks are happening everywhere all over the United States, or, you know, bank accounts being hacked into and that kind of a thing. I mean, it's a real threat, but it's not something that people are very afraid of because it doesn't feel real. You know, when you're setting up a password or any other things, like cyber crimes and attacks don't really seem like something that's on the forefront of your mind. It doesn't seem like something that's a real possibility to most people, I think.
Yeah, it's like you got your outlet. I know power always comes out of the outlet. If it doesn't, they'll get it fixed really quick, you know? It's one of those things. It's one of those things that like I feel like would happen really, like you wouldn't realize the devastating effects until like, oh, the power goes out. Okay, like they'll probably have it fixed in a while. Okay.
What if they can't?
It's not fixed for a day. Okay, this is kind of weird, you know? All of a sudden your phone battery's running low. Or even worse, the phone towers are down and you can't communicate anymore, you know? And so it's like, oh crap, that would be bad. So what were you going to say?
No, that was it.
Yeah, so...
Well, all of a sudden we end up in Texas.
I know.
Those poor guys. Yeah, we saw what that did. Just a little freak storm.
Yeah.
That was, you know, probably well handled, but just hard to respond to. I didn't follow it too closely, but it sounded like a lot of people were out of power for quite a decent amount of time.
Yeah, so they ran out of power, and then when the power finally came back on, you know, for the people they were powering, the next week this power company sent them like a $10,000 bill or something, each of the residents, for like all their heating and stuff like that. Like I think there was like, I can't remember the specifics, but there's obviously like some big giant lawsuit against them now to not do that.
Yeah,
I was like,
that seems fair.
To not do that.
Like I was like, gosh, you know, but like taking devil's advocate here on, I kind of feel for the power company in this scenario, because Texas is not like the place where you expect a freak blizzard like that happening, and then your company being responsible to supply power to try to get all the manpower and employees out there to try to manage this disaster. And then you probably, I mean, the billing thing, realistically, it was probably some line of code somewhere that they just have in their system that it's like, hey, this person used X amount of heat, go ahead and charge them this much, you know? And then they have this whole backlash of all these people freaking out. They're like, okay, like we didn't mean to do that, but we were like strapped trying to manage this disaster, and now we have this. And so I feel like it's easy to dogpile on top of them. Not to say they were totally in the right, but like,
yeah, well,
but who knows?
Who knows? Who knows?
And from what I understand, wasn't like a lot of the issue that it was a privatized system? Like, because I think that's one thing that I remember hearing that's very unique about Texas's power grid as well, was that it was privatized and controlled by several different companies. And so I guess just for the sake of profit, it didn't make as much sense to have a lot of those fail-safes in place in case it got that cold, because it wasn't really an economically good decision. You know, it wasn't very likely possibility, which is where some of the backlash that I at least read came, where they were like, okay, well, you privatized the power system, and now, well, look at that. You're not equipped to deal with a lot of these disasters the same way that a government might be because of, you know, competition and those sort of things.
Sure, but I honestly doubt that a governmental institution would have done any different. I doubt it's the privatization of the grid and more just the fact that when certain things were in place, guidelines were not in place to say this is how we standardize the way we do things. I'd be willing to bet it was just something about the code and the age of the system more than anything, because I doubt the government themselves would have done anything different.
I think that's likely. The only thing that I thought was interesting was that only Texas was the one that had that issue, even though I'm sure that a storm that wide, I would imagine it would have affected Louisiana as well, maybe parts of southern Oklahoma. It just seemed like it was only Texas that really dealt with that. And it had been that cold before in the past when it hadn't been privatized, but it just seemed like it was this particular time that it made such an issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to really attribute that to. It's probably the time at which it took place in. Just everything's older than it would have been at any other time. The jet stream probably drug stuff a little bit farther south than it usually had. So, and I know places like Louisiana being so close to the Gulf are by default a little bit warmer. So places like Houston were probably better off. I didn't see any maps of what exactly they had, but I'd be willing to bet that has something to do with it.
Yeah, we'll have to do some research and really look into this topic to
go grab a meteorologist.
Oh boy. Listen, sir,
do not come to us for the weather.
No.
We are not experts in very many things, FYI.
Yeah, if you're getting all of your information from us, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
We're here to create an awareness, not to advise you. Yeah.
So there was one thing that I, just kind of changing gears here a little bit, something that I had kind of, I guess, posed, or a question that I had kind of asked before we began, and I was thinking maybe we could discuss that now as well. We're all in college. We're at various different stages in college. I'm, for me, this is Nick. I'm just finishing up essentially my sophomore year, beginning my junior year, around there. I don't really know exactly which one I would be considered. But I've got another 2 years or so left until I'm finished with my bachelor's degree. And the rest of us are kind of in different places, but I thought it might be interesting to talk about how we arrived at deciding the direction that we were kind of going to go and some of that process that took into place, because that's something that's been on my mind recently is how do we decide what we want, especially at such an interesting time of life when there really is no clear way forward.
Yeah, no pressure, big life decisions. You got to make it right. No redos, man. Yeah. No, it's a very good question. I honestly don't know how I landed with this level of clarity in my degree. So I majored in MIS for the listeners listening right now. I majored in MIS. I convinced Nick Nelson to major in MIS, which I hail as a victory. And then I proceeded to convince Spalding. Well, I'm not sure if I am the one who convinced you. You were kind of doing your own thing, right? Or maybe I did convince you. I don't know.
You convinced me by being an MIS major, and then I was like, it works out well for you. And then talking with you a lot, yeah, it definitely had an impact for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conversion by proxy.
Conversion by proxy.
Yep.
Beautiful. Basically, just major in MIS and you'll be good. It's
a blanket statement.
Yeah. Yeah. So MIS, really quick for the listeners, stands for Management Information Systems. For anyone that was confused by the acronyms, we use a lot of acronyms. It's basically like an IT degree. So it's through the School of Business here. So you get all of the business classes, accounting, finance, marketing, all those core business classes, which I always knew I wanted to go into business. I knew eventually I want to start my own business. I think that'd be way fun. And I'm also really into tech. And MIS is okay, you get all the core business classes, but then you also get the tech side, which is, databases and web development and Python programming and stuff like that, and computers, which I love that type of stuff. So I was like, geez, business and technology, this seems like a pretty good degree to get nowadays, you can't really go wrong. But I think the way I did it, and I remember because I was originally going to go into I was originally signed up for just business administration, just the general, go to the business school, and business administration is the one you do. That's if you don't know what business degree you're getting, So I was originally going to do that. Then I was kind of exploring, and I took one finance class, and I really liked that finance class. And so then I changed my major to finance, got through some other finance classes, kind of realized not sure I'm feeling finance just because of you kind of figure out through the range of characters who are like the teachers and like the types of people. And I realized like finance is like a really, at least for me, the finance industry is really like, work 80 hours a week. And, the big Goldman Sachs places where like, yeah, you can be really, really successful, but it's like you're working all day, every day. You know what I mean? And so I was like, okay, kind of from that perspective. I also had some MIS classes that were a lot more laid back, but a lot more applicable, where it was like, hey, let's get into the data. Let's do databases. Let's do, all this cool stuff. And I was already working a job in IT too. So I was like, I think I'll switch to MIS. So I switched to MIS, loved it ever since. I still love like finance stuff, but yeah, MIS is the way to go. Because then you can like, at least from my perspective, I'm talking a lot here. I want to hear you guys' takes on this too. I like MIS because you can, with your background in both business and just knowing like how to look at data, you can really easily pivot to whatever career you want. If you want to go into sales, salespeople are going to be using data. If you want to pivot into engineering, well, you got the technical background to know engineering. If you want to pivot into whatever, accounting, you're obviously going to be using data and stuff for accounting and technology. So it's like, it's a really good degree for both, like if you want to work in IT, and then also if you ever want to go somewhere with it, a technical background is like really good. So that's where I come from. That was my path that I somehow ended up with, which I'm very grateful for. But I want to know you guys' thoughts on the whole discovering your major experience.
I almost feel that we do things a little bit backwards. As far as society seems to have a map for how you're supposed to do things, where you graduate college or high school, and before you even go through your last 2 years of high school, most people now are expected to have some sort of idea of here's what I'm going to be majoring in, and here's where I'm going to go to school, and making all of these decisions when you're 16. That's kind of the average age now. We start taking the ACT test when we're juniors in high school, something like that. Yeah. And I know things just keep getting earlier and earlier. I remember that being a huge stress for me as a high school student, as far as being at such a young age and untested, and yet being demanded to answer certain questions about the rest of my future that I did not know how to answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like in my first podcast episode, Aunt Janice at every Thanksgiving dinner asks you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you have a huge mounting pressure to give her some answer.
Yep.
Because everyone has an answer, and if you don't have one, it probably means there's something wrong with you. So you give her an answer, no matter how baloney it is. Even though on the underneath you have no idea what's going on, you have no idea what you're going to do about it, it all just seems very fuzzy and staticky. So I feel like we do things a little bit backwards. You really should. Now, here's where I think maybe I have a bit of a biased opinion too, because...
What? You have a biased opinion?
Well,
oh my goodness, Nick. We can't have you on the podcast anymore.
Oh, no. Well, I say that because I went through my first 2 years of school and I decided to take a break. Much to the chagrin of my peers and family members. That was a very looked down upon move.
Yes, but because you were going to be my roommate, then you moved out.
I still feel bad about that. I really do.
It was all good. I've forgiven you, obviously, mostly.
The man's a little salty, and rightly so as well.
No, but that was good. I'm sure. Like the break was good for you, man.
It was needed, and I honestly don't know how anyone goes through life without having that sort of thing. I made it through the first couple of years of college. Enough time to the point where you can go through all the piddly stuff that just doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You can finish off your associate's degree and before you really need to have something specialized. By that time, after your second year, you probably ought to have something like that nailed down just because you have to do it in order to graduate on time. So I took a lot of time off, about 2 years. And I honestly think the two things that I needed in order to make a better decision on what I should be doing in the next 10 years of my life was just to taste things. At such a young age, I think it's ridiculous for a high school student to be up and coming and say, I'm going to be a marketing major. I love marketing. You have no idea what you are even talking about. Mm-hmm. Don't even pretend like you do, because everyone else knows you're full of crap. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
Just like Mike was saying with the whole IT job thing, people who say they want to go in IT are the ones that do not understand what IT even is. Because it's a blanket term, and who's to blame them? You have no idea what the world is. You haven't tasted anything yet. And in my opinion, if you're going to succeed at something, you should just get out there and do something. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this a lot, and I just can't help but feel this is what you need to be doing if you don't know what to do. Explore. Try things. You need to understand yourself, and then get better at doing the things that you were actually good at. And I think that just takes discovery. For me, it took about 2 years before I started to get something of a handle on it, and I really didn't have anything more solidified until I finally got up here to school. Because I had demands on my skills, and I kind of had to bring those out in order to meet those demands, if that makes sense. But I couldn't have developed them if I didn't take free time to go out and do stuff.
You got to build that awareness first.
You got to build that awareness. And here's one thing where I had been, when I came back to school, I had every intention of being a finance and economics dual major. That was what I was going to do because I liked finance, and I too want to start my own business eventually. Understandably, probably not within the next couple years, perhaps, but in the future, that is a goal of mine to do. So I figured, well, I better have some skills with numbers, and that was kind of that was the leading factor. I need to be a businessman. After that, I took a break and did a lot of project management, details of which I won't go into, but I did a lot of managing.
I might need to hear this.
Managing large-scale projects.
And
I understood that I had a good aptitude for that sort of thing. And then I had to encounter more challenges as far as, okay, this project requires a few different technical things. Like, I need a database in order to track all of my sales for this thing because we don't have one right now. I created a lot of systems like that. I just tasted things, and I encountered problems. I had to come up with a solution, and then I got better at creating those types of solutions. The other thing that I did was try taking a few personality tests, which you should always take with a grain of salt. Nothing like that is ever super, super accurate. Yeah, it's always very approximate. But here's the thing. I think you discover a few things about yourself that maybe you weren't willing to admit about yourself. Here was one thing. As a kid, I always wanted to be an author. That was my biggest dream. I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote stories all the time. I have books filled with them of stuff that I would do. I've got a whole container back at my apartment just full of my old writing stuff. And I had stopped doing that through high school. And I honestly never really considered myself to be a creative person. It's just, I had stopped doing that sort of thing. I didn't picture myself as a creative person. Then I went through some of Jordan Peterson's, the self-authoring suite is what I did. Yeah. And then he has a very long, it took me an hour and a half to go through his test. And it's pretty reputable. And what I came out with was I was at the 97th percentile in conscientiousness is that one. So organization, working, that sort of thing. And I was at the 95th percentile in creative stuff, in openness.
Isn't
top
that
5%.
That kind of a rare combination?
That is a really weird combination and is a very rare combination.
That's interesting.
But it blew me away. I had no idea I would be that high.
Huh.
And then I started looking at myself and realized how much of my anxiety with regards to finance and economics came from having to follow so many strict rules. I had so little wiggle room to just explore and do cool stuff. And I put 2 and 2 together about this time last year. You remember I had that big interview with Goldman Sachs?
Yes.
It was with their operations management department. And one of the biggest key factors that they had in their whole department was, we have a very strict set of rules because we submit financial documents to the FCC. Is that the organization? We submit
SEC.
Yes, that one.
Securities and Exchange Commission.
Thank you. That one.
FCC is like communications or something.
Okay. Yeah.
we know what you're saying.
I don't know why I had that mixed up. But like, yeah, they submit a lot of documents to some very official organizational bodies. And you need to have things perfect.
Yeah, have your ducks in a row, man.
And as they were going through stuff, I just started getting anxiety in the middle of the thing. And I'm just going, what am I supposed to be doing here? I'm a machine. I had a lot of anxiety about that sort of thing. I looked at all the other positions that I had available to me in this field of work and realized, hey, that probably doesn't match up with what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And it also was very different from what I had been doing in the past when I moved down to Arizona and I did stuff that had no rule book. And I thrived in it because I worked 100 hours a week because I could just do what I needed to do. And if a problem rose up, I didn't have a booklet telling me how to do it and telling me I had to do it exactly this way. I found a way to do it.
Like, just figure it out, man.
Just figure it out. Openness is very much that sort of thing. So I can't be in a career where I have to be strangled to death by rules and regulations. Obviously, normalization, security, that's...
You're always going to have rules and regulations in some aspect.
There's no disregard for that, of course. But I just shouldn't be in a thing where my day-to-day, every single task it has to be done to the T exactly this way.
Yeah.
So I realized that about myself. And then I took a look at MIS degree stuff to the point where I've got a little bit more freedom when I code and I develop databases. And I do things, I make things very strict and very, very creative, but it turns out that way because I was able to explore and see what worked, see what didn't work, and then I was able to implement the best solution. Yeah. I realized that about myself, and then I tried to find something that matched what I was good at and what I wanted to get better at. Yeah. That's a very long-winded answer of saying I needed two things. I needed time and space just to go out and do my own thing and do things outside of the normal spectrum, to taste things. And then I got a little bit better at being self-aware, looking inside and saying, okay, what am I good at and what do I want to get better at? I have no idea if that's the right answer, but it settled a lot of personal anxiety for me, if that makes any sense.
See, that's an interesting idea. Like, the interesting thing is that obviously choosing your major is not the end of the world. Like,
oh yeah, that too.
I feel like there's a statistic that like most people don't go into whatever their major was. Like,
yeah,
majority of people like will major in something and then just go into something completely different. Like, my dad got a degree in psychology, but he is not a psychologist. He's a seminary teacher, a religious high school teacher, and so it's interesting. Like, I feel like when you're in college, like, you feel like that direction you go is pretty much everything. Like, for me, I've had 5 majors that I've been in. The first one my mom chose for me because I was on a religious mission and did not have the capability to really research what I wanted to do.
What was it?
It was economics. And I took one economics class. I was like, nope, not this.
As do we all, my friend.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think economics is cool. I would love to actually triple major in it now that I've kind of reconsidered things.
Don't get any ideas.
I don't want to triple major right now. Don't get me wrong. But then I ended up in like a management major. So it was like management and law and constitutional studies. And the law and constitutional studies classes, I just felt like they were boring almost for me. And it wasn't that the subject is boring. I just wasn't really taken by it. And then I ended up in management as well. And business management, it's all HR kind of stuff. And after a while, it just kind of felt repetitive and didn't really feel like I was learning anything like marketable. It was just kind of like, be a good leader and, treat people well and
be positive.
Don't say racist things, like things like that, where it's like, well, yeah don't do that. That's HR just know-how, obviously. Like,
yeah.
And so I remember it was so funny. I was it was last semester, and registration for me was like the next day, and I didn't have my I didn't have my classes chosen or anything, and it was like 1 a.m, and I was just kind of sitting there like, well, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I know I kind of want to do business and I kind of want to do political stuff, but I was looking through it, and I went through the different major requirements, and I realized, like, wait a second, like, MIS sounds kind of cool. Like, every friend I have does MIS, and they say it's the most marketable major of all the business majors. That's what I've taken from it.
There you go.
The highest job placement. I was like, great, that's practical. And then I started looking through the requirements of political science, and I was like, well, gee whiz, this is exactly what I like. Like, I just want to take classes about international studies and politics and government and stuff, and not have it so focused on just like law and the Constitution, but just kind of general things that will open doors. And so for me, it was funny. Like, it was just like, 1 a.m, I'm just sitting there at my kitchen table, and I just stroke of just like inspiration, like, this is what I need to major in. By golly, I'll major in. And so I sent an email to my advisors, and I didn't even meet with my advisors. I was just like, yeah, this is what I want. I'm pretty sure. So I think it depends. But I think the interesting thing, and I don't know about you guys, do you guys ever feel like if you like there's this pressure that you'll fall behind if you're not like on top?
Oh yeah.
And not just with like majors, but it's like the idea of college. Like, I was looking into like running for student body positions in the future, and I realized I was like, oh no, like when I was a freshman, I wasn't in all these committees, and now because I wasn't in those committees, I don't have the traction I need to then become a leader here, and then I don't have what I need to become elected. And I started feeling like, wow, my future's down the drain. I mean, because I wasn't in traditions committee as a freshman, I guess like I just won't have a future. I mean, that's it. And so I think part of it is fighting against that. Yeah. Anyways, that's my little spiel about that. But
yeah, no, you bring up a really good point about feeling like you always gotta just be on your game all the time and in a part of a million things, and especially like in college when you're not even sure what you want to do, but like you look around, you see, oh, so and so is the leader of this club, and they've already got this internship lined up, and oh geez, and then you go to your other friend, and oh man, he's doing this, and they got this cool job, and you're like, oh, I better get my act together, man. Like, and there's just this whole pressure. But I think like a lot of people are in the same boat where it's like, nobody really has their crap together. Like sometimes I feel like, at least for me in my life, like occasionally I'll hit a sprint where it's like, oh yeah, everything's lining up. This is going really good, But more often, that's pretty rare. More often than not, it's like, okay, like I got a few things that are going good. Other stuff, it's like, okay, I could do a little better in those areas. You know what I mean? And I think it's like that for everyone. But nobody puts their worst foot forward. You always see usually the better side of people. That's the side that they're going to project, And so you get this really weird view of, and you're trying to orient yourself in society based on, the feedback you're receiving from your social circles. And it makes you feel like, oh, crap, like, am I even heading in the right direction here, And so, but that brings me to kind of another interesting point I heard. I think it was from Jordan Peterson too. A lot of Jordan Peterson in this episode. But you said something, Spalding, that was interesting. That was like, it was, if I'm not part of this committee, it's like, it's almost like a domino effect. It's like, okay, well, that ruins my student body run, and then like what's even the point of doing this major, and then it catapults into like this really big like snowball, right? And I remember watching a Jordan Peterson lecture, and this is really good for like people who have or who struggle with like depression or anxiety about things, is that oftentimes what happens is people don't restrict things to their domain that they need to be restricted to. So like the example I think he used was, oh, I might fail this test in accounting or something, Well, if I fail the test in accounting, I'm going to fail accounting. Well, if I fail accounting, I might fail out of business school. Oh, if I fail out of business school, what options will that leave me in life? I'll be in debt forever, and I'll struggle and stuff like that. Okay, well, hold on. You just took one little domain, one class, one test even, that you haven't even taken yet, and you have extrapolated it to your whole life. And so emotionally, you're experiencing the emotions of my life is over when it's actually just a few strategic things that you need to do better on the test, or it's actually a pretty manageable issue. But emotionally, you're not experiencing this manageable issue. You're experiencing my life is over. This is a disaster. You know, which I thought was interesting. So like, you know, whenever I really get like stressed out about stuff, I've kind of started to notice that, like, obviously it's still hard sometimes because it's emotions. It's just, you feel it, you know, but to remember that, hey, you know, in this one situation, this is not going my way. This is not a reflection of my broader life as a whole. This is just this one situation that we just need to strategically realign on and manage a little bit differently. And to be careful about that, not letting it snowball out of the way. Oftentimes easier said than done, but I mean, it made a lot of sense to me, and I thought that was interesting, you know. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, me included. And so that was my thought about that.
I remember, now that you mentioned that, I think that probably probably doesn't come directly from it, but he probably extrapolated it from his first book. I was reading Maps of Meaning, which is the long one, the one that he wrote back in, I think, the 90s. I think that was his first one that he wrote. It's a very big book. But one of the very first chapters that he has is that as human beings, we don't see things. We see the thing that it does. We see utility, not a thing. If you see a chair, you don't see a chair. You see a sitting thing. Yeah. If that makes sense. Okay. If you see a fork, you don't see a piece of metal that is shaped a very specific way. You see the utility that fork gives you.
I can eat with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I
use it to eat food.
It's an eating utensil.
Yeah.
And there's so many other things that it could be if you were a little bit more creative with it. Well, any object. I'm picking random objects out of the air.
Yeah.
But
you're right. Yeah.
The basis of his point was no matter what you see, you will only see what you can do with that object. It's just something like the way that you process things just is engineered that way. So it's probably the same idea. When you see the test, you don't see, oh, this is a test that I'm about to take. You see an obstacle that's blocking the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I feel that on a spiritual level.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Yeah, well, and talking about a lot of this, it reminds me of like this book I was reading. So I told you guys before, I was reading President Obama's memoir, A Promised Land. And that's a really great way to feel pretentious, you know, and to like assert your dominance on people when you tell them you're reading this like, you know, an 800-page book written by President Obama, you know. But it was so interesting. I only got to where he was elected, and that's as far as I got into the book. You know, shows you how academic I really am. But I was reading it, and as I was like, my mind was going through it and being like, well, Nick, if you wanted to be president, that ship sailed, man. You didn't do any community organizing things like Obama did. So I thought it's gone, man. Like I'm sorry, you're not on the right track. And so just kind of speaking of a lot of these things, like sometimes I think we really do extrapolate those small maybe shortcomings and human aspects to who we are, and we kind of broaden them out beyond what they're supposed to be and say like, well, shoot, too far to do that. And I think that comes a lot down to comparison as well. You know, you compare yourself unhealthily to people. I think it's great to compare yourself to successful people so that you can also, you know, take the good and try to incorporate it in your life. But I think there's a reverse side as well, which is fairly harmful. I mean, the great thing about life is that you often don't realize how great it is until it's like in hindsight. Like you look backwards and you say, wow, I wouldn't have chosen anything else any other way. Like things just lined up for me there. You know, I mean, briefly, I mean, I went on a religious mission for 2 years, but the first time I left, I went to live in Sierra Leone, and I've mentioned that on previous episodes as well. But I was in a car crash the very first day, and I ended up breaking my leg and going home. And I wouldn't have planned it that way originally, but it was a great learning experience, you know, and it kind of gave me some depth as a person. So I think sometimes those little setbacks are actually ways that we can, those setbacks in life kind of give us access to better things that we can't always see. So I think sometimes you just kind of live day to day, do the best you can, have a general plan, but don't be too hard on yourself, I think.
I agree. It reminds me, so I watched this, it was this TED Talk by Simon Sinek. He's the guy that does the, why, the motivate. He's a motivational speaker, business guy. He was given this one, though. The talk was called The Infinite Game, I think. And he basically breaks down different types of, games that humans play. And he kind of breaks it down into two categories where you got a finite game where you have defined rules, a winner and a loser, think like a game of basketball, or, you can extrapolate that into bigger things like warfare, Warfare, there is a winner and a loser. It's like you're trying to beat the other team so that they surrender. Anyway, that was what a finite game is. There is conditions of victory that you need to satisfy in order to win. And then there are infinite games. Infinite games, they don't really have those victory conditions. They have areas where people might be ahead, people might be behind, but you're focused on different areas. Think like, lifting weights. That's depending on how you view it, that's an infinite game because it's like, well, I'm going to keep pushing myself and trying to, get to this new weight and try this different exercise and just improve over time. But the interesting thing what he says about his talk is that sometimes what will happen is people will misalign those things and they will approach something with a finite perspective. And when you approach an infinite game with a finite perspective, it really demoralizes you. So if you're trying to approach every situation where there is a winner and a loser, and this is how it's, if I don't win, then I didn't win and I lost the game. The problem is we're playing, a lot of people do that where they approach different subjects with the finite game mentality where it's like, okay, here's the victory conditions that I need to satisfy to win. And if I'm not satisfying them, then I'm a loser and I've lost, and it really demoralizes them. When the game that really matters over life is you're playing an infinite game. You're going to be ahead in many areas that many other people are not ahead in. You're going to be behind many other people in other areas, but you're not playing the same game as everyone else because your life is so vastly different. You have such vastly different experiences. You are so vastly, your unique mindset, your unique attributes that you have. It's ridiculous to compare with anyone else with those different combinations of things. So I thought it was interesting, especially with comparison. It's really easy, especially as, business majors and are a lot of the data-driven mindset of hey, we need a baseline to compare this to. And comparison, if you use it right, it's really good to figure out where you're at. Used inappropriately, though, and if it affects your morale, then it can really harm somebody's self-esteem. So I think that's important to keep in mind is in life, you're playing an infinite game. It's not like if I win, you're not competing against anyone. Even in business, the businesses that succeed the most are the businesses that are focused on where they're going, focused on their customers, focused on, providing a better product. They're not focused on their competition. They're not focused on winning. They're focused on where they're going. So I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of an interesting parallel.
See, I don't want to cut you off either. I just want to make a quick comment. I remember reading, so yesterday I was reading Richard III, the Shakespeare play. And it's an interesting play. Yeah, this is for a program. I'm not that studious, but I was reading it, and the premise is essentially this guy, Richard, he's like he's a brother to the king, or he's like the third younger brother, or I can't remember his exact relationship, but he's a higher up government official, kind of a nobleman, and he is down on himself because he wants power and he's kind of deformed and doesn't see an access or a pathway to it. And so the premise is he kills a bunch of people, manipulates them, does everything he can to claw his way up to the top of the ladder. And, he basically backstabs everybody. And eventually he becomes king. But at the end of the play, some of the people that helped him to become king, I forgot his name, but one of the main actors who helped him to become king feels slighted after Richard gets his power. this guy that helped him get power didn't really get any good treatment. You know, he was kind of treated badly. And so all of Richard's friends then leave him and actually overthrow the kingdom. And he only lasts as king for maybe a week or two. And so it's fascinating. Like, in the end of the play, Richard is miserable and he hates his life and everything's terrible, even though he has succeeded. And even though he got everything he wanted, he makes a comment, "My kingdom for a horse." Like, he would give it up for a horse and his life. Like, and it's so interesting that the goal that you feel like you might want to get might not actually be what you want. You know, and everyone talks about the simple minimalist life. Well, that might actually be happier. Maybe being the CEO of a major corporation or being the president of the United States is not actually what's going to make you happy or going to bring the most fulfillment to you. And so sometimes I think we have these standards of like what is success, when in reality, like, you might be happier working, you know, this other job that isn't really as highly regarded. You know, you're working maybe construction or you're a janitor, but maybe you're happier with it. Maybe you like where you are. So I think that the end goal also might be a big thing. Power and money isn't always the answer to happiness.
I'm going to take a quick noisy second here. I forgot to plug in before we started.
Oh, don't let your laptop die.
Yeah. I'm on 14% here.
I was like, oh, where was I? Oh, I was playing Age of Empires with my brothers, and all of a sudden I saw my laptop screen go dim. We were right in the middle of a game.
Oh,
and I was like,
no.
I was like, pause the game.
Not good.
Or I put my charger out, you know. I'm like, geez, like, how's my computer able to function for that long without the power cable in? You know, it's kind of funny. Yeah, no, I think happiness is a weird phenomenon, because society tells you, this is getting like kind of existential, not really existential, but like, I don't know, kind of a deeper conversation. Mm-hmm. Society tells you like what you need to be happy, right? And it's like, oh, you need you need all this, and you need to be rich, and you need a really crazy good job, and you need all this stuff, and it's they almost predefine everything. I say I don't think there's like a secret society out there that's like, oh, we need to, you know, force these standards among us. I think that's just how it is. It's, you know, everything is portrayed in a certain way.
It's a cultural animal.
It's just a cultural animal. Yeah, there's no one organization in charge of this, which I know some people think that's the case. I don't. I think that's ridiculous.
Illuminati.
The Illuminati confirmed. Yeah. But yeah, I think that conversation doesn't happen enough, where it's like, you know, everybody says do what you love, but like culturally, is that what the culture is saying? No, and you have to be aware of that. You know what I mean?
I think part of it comes down to the fact that we do compare ourselves to other people. And to some degree, you probably need that, because society is a fine-tuned piano over goodness knows how long, where you can't... Most people get married and have kids. Why? Well, it's because what everyone does. No, wrong. It's probably because over how many, goodness knows how many thousands of years, we've discovered that you are happier when you find a spouse, when you have children that you raise, and then you have grandchildren that keep you busy in your old age. It's not just a thing, man. It's not just a cultural norm for no reason. There's a reason certain things happen. We might not know it, but, you know, society has put together these things over a very long period of time, and you throw that away at your own peril. So it's not like society is like always oppressive. And I remember one particular argument that he had. Society is, in fact, oppressive by definition. Yeah. The problem with labeling it as a bad thing because of that is that you don't... As an individual, you give up some of your individuality and you trade that for the benefit that society gives you over time. We have discovered that families are one of the best ways to exist as an individual within a small but tightly knit group of people. Yeah. That you connect with yourself, and then you create kids, and you have a very small structure. You are at the top of that dominance hierarchy. That is good for you. You give up a piece of your individuality that you would otherwise have in order to partake of that. In that sense, society is oppressive. Now, the problem is if you go the other way around and refuse to give yourself up, then all of a sudden you're reinventing the wheel on everything, which is just a straight up problem. You have 100 years to live. You will never figure it out. So you kind of have to trust society at some point on that one.
Yeah.
And if you don't make that sacrifice, you're just throwing things away.
Yeah. I think it comes down to, I mean, you always have to strike a balance.
Oh, of course.
So, like, I totally agree with you. Society provides a sense of structure in many ways that helps you, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's like, okay, having a family, yeah, lots of people have families. Like, okay, it's probably a good way to go, However, I think you have, again, balancing it out. The other side of that is like there's all these things that, society as a whole is pushing you to do, the things you see in Hollywood or the things that look cool, which like they do look cool, Is that actually true? Is the things that I see in movies and the things that I see, everywhere that on advertisements and stuff like that, is that a realistic view of the world? And, do I need to make a judgment call here where, okay, I might be going against what society is telling me, but it's actually for my greater happiness. I think you got to strike that balance.
Of course, I'm just playing devil's advocate for sure.
I
think there's a difference between, you can make a small distinction between the meta things that society tells us what we should do, and then the Instagram influencer thing that tells us where we should be.
Yeah.
Where I think
you
for
have
me,
to reach this high standard.
For me, that's a very visceral just example of the difference between the two.
There's a difference. There's a difference between like it's like you got the social media funnel, man. It's like this black hole of just stuff.
Well, because it creates.
And you got norms.
It's
like
not just
cultural.
telling you what's good about what life could be. It's just one of those things that gives you an unrealistic example to reach for. Mm-hmm. Despite all of the bad things in that person's life, despite the fact that 80% of it isn't true or isn't what what is it presented to be. To me, that's the distinction that you have to make. There's the balance.
Yeah,
it's about projecting kind of a thing. Like it's not about like what you're living.
Don't compare yourself to the projection of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, in that sense, maybe I would say that maybe the difference of when you listen to society and when you do not is when it's grounded in reality, or grounding your life in reality. Because
this is like getting to like what is real.
What is real? Yeah, nothing is real. Everybody, just FYI. No, but I mean, because when you think about the problems with perfection in society, when people talk about society as a problem, they generally think of like unrealistic beauty standards, or just standards of I should be rich and famous, which is not really grounded in reality. Famous people aren't really as real as we give them credit for. They really don't have that much of an influence in your life.
A lot of famous people are actually really, really unhappy.
I mean, that idea that they are just like 10 times happier than you because of who they are is just false. It's not real. But then in the flip side, I think that sometimes people rebel against society in a way that rejects reality as well, where they say, I don't need to worry about responsibilities. I want to play video games, and I don't really need to worry about my future. I don't really care what society has to tell me. And that is the exact opposite, but equally dangerous, is if you don't root yourself in reality and in realistic expectations for yourself and your future, then you're probably going to get screwed. Either you're going to end up, playing video games for the rest of your life and not really going very far, or you're going to end up just beating yourself against a wall because you don't look like so-and-so, or you're not as rich as so-and-so. So I think that's where it is for me, is reality. What's realistic?
Yeah. But yeah. What's realistic and it's an interesting balance, because I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from some business lecture somewhere to dream big. Everybody has heard that. Everybody's like, dream big, chase your dreams, go for it. But then I have been in other business classes. This drives me up a wall, by the way. I've been in other business classes and other people that are like, set achievable goals, set smart goals, And you're looking at these two things, and I'm more just thinking out loud here. Maybe there's something I'm missing. But I'm looking at these two things, and I'm like, okay, which one should I be going for here? Obviously, kind of the case for dreaming big is that, hey, you want something that really motivates you, that really drives you to, have fun along the way and have something to go get. But then the more realistic side is like, hey, you want to be more realistic because you're able to achieve more that way, and you're able to realistically get on a path to progress, where I think the fear is if you set really big, giant dreams as big goals, it's like, okay, well, this is so big. How it's like eating an elephant. Like, okay, well, like, how do I even start with this? Well, I don't start. I play video games, And so that is something that just like, I don't know. I think I found kind of the balance though, because I think the idea is you want to have like a bit more of a direction for your life. I don't know what you would call that. If that's a lifestyle you're going for, if that's the type of person you want to become as kind of your big dream goal, and then set more, I guess, the realistic smaller goals that are. That was weird. That was like the building.
For reference, we're on the third story of this building, and something just rustled past the window.
Something rustled past the window.
And I was kind of weirded out by that.
I saw Nick's eyes get really big and just look out the window.
Sorry.
It was funny. I was like, do I need to be worried about
to
something?
break the stream of consciousness here.
Anyway, but that's, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Because I'm sure you guys hear that, right? Is there a distinction I'm missing? Is there a way to fit those two together?
No, it's a question. That's one of the two questions that went into my second episode that I keep telling you guys about. We've been through that conversation before, of course, but that's literally part of that question and part of that episode. Spalding, you and I had this conversation like a year and a half ago in the TSC. I still have a ton of notes from it because we just went in, we went off on this sort of thing. But do you remember the analogy that I made? And I should probably ask you if this remains true. But it feels like when you're trying to decide what you want to do in life, you have kind of a vision of what the ideal looks like, and it's pretty far in the future. It's cool, it's fancy, it's everything you could want, and you could see snapshots of it. You see it in the future, you can see yourself there, you can see yourself doing it. Yeah. And then you can see where you are now, and all that entails, the good and the bad. And then there's this big black expanse between them. That's just kind of full of fuzzy black fog for me.
Gap.
And when I get on that type of scale, I just feel lost because I don't know how to reconcile one with the other. I don't know what the path looks like. What should I do? What should I focus on? I think that's where the anxiety comes from. And then, of course, you get the other aspect where it makes me want to throw up, where everyone says, set realistic goals, people. Use the STAR method.
Yeah.
I swear.
Exactly.
I'd like to punch somebody when it happens. Here's the reconciliation for me. Let's go back to kind of like the meta scale for a minute here. How society is one of the driving factors that tells you probably what you should be aiming at, as far as, wealthy people tend to be happier, and, we like to see all these sorts of things. If you peel that back far enough, I think it just becomes some sort of structure that you should strive for. Very abstractly. It's not that you need to be the leader of a band in Hollywood that's just exalted. He's rich, he's famous, all the women love him, that sort of thing. Those are what it looks like. But there's some very abstract things back there working. Like, you need to be very good at something. Does that make sense? You need to be a master of your craft.
Yeah.
That guy in the example is a master singer, like at Freddie Mercury. He's an excellent singer. He's super, super good at what he does. No one else could do it like him. Another thing might be, not only is he good at it, but maybe he's also good looking. And then he's very hardworking. He's always working on something, being creative, trying new things. The examples that we see are just the songs that he creates and all of his creative endeavors, that sort of thing. But to me, there's just a few backlying principles behind this is what really cool people do. And in my opinion, if you go far enough back, one of the biggest things that influences our culture at a framework level, it's like when you scaffold out a brand new building. You don't know exactly what the building looks like, but you know it's probably going to look squarish, so it can support itself with its own weight. It's going to have square rooms because that's a good way to produce a lot of space, not like a circle, but you have a really good way to produce a lot of square footage, to have beams at the corners that they can support the rest of the building as you go up, that sort of thing. Yeah. When you go back to the scaffolding, That's what religion has been for a lot of people, because it gives you a really well thought out version of, hey, we've done some testing and we understand these are what really cool people do. And then they gave us an example. In the example of Christianity, one of the biggest ones, they gave us Christ and said, listen, we've got this guy that is an embodiment of all the good things you can think of in the best person. Do stuff that he would do. And it seems like a perfectly reasonable proposition to me. Why don't you be like the best person we could possibly think of? And we see that in all of our heroes. Here's what he looks like. Here's what he does. Here's his whole story. Study it. Go do it. That seems to me like one of the best things you can possibly do. And we do it with all of our heroes. Even if some of them have faults, of course.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what it is. And personally, I don't have that metaphysical belief, but I have other frameworks that I've tried to develop in that stead and along the same lines. Because you can't throw away the baby with the bathwater type thing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
I think so.
I don't know where that phrase came from. That is awful.
It's such a funny phrase.
Isn't it? We still use it.
Yeah.
This is regular conversation. It's goofy.
Yeah.
But see, that's what it means to me. And I've got a poem that I found that just embodies that incredibly well, and I'm just blown away by it. It's called If by Rudyard Kipling. I've mentioned it to you guys before. I'm not a poetry guy. I'm not an enthusiast for this sort of thing.
Let it slide for this once, Nick. No.
Indeed. But this is the thing that I think it avoids the trap of setting super arbitrary guidelines where I need to have X done by X age, otherwise it means I'm not successful. It avoids that, but stays within the framework of if I'm going to be a good person, I should embody this type of characteristic. You know what I mean? It's a really long poem, but I did bring it up. I'm just going to read the first stanza of it, just to give you an idea of how the poem goes. Yeah. He says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. That's just how it starts, and the entire poem is the description of if you can do this, if you can do this. And the poem ends, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. That's the poem. And for me, that's like a guiding North Star. That's like the embodiment of this is the ideal person. This is, it doesn't matter what you do, but if you can do it this way, you'll be a man.
That is
what do you think?
Awesome.
That's way cool. I love that like idea that, and when you say like you'll be a man, like I can just imagine like the type of dude that I imagine myself being in some kind of far distant future. And I'll think, wow, like I won't be focused on just I have to be that kind of guy, but I'll just be trying to, like you said, embody those good things. And then I'll wake up one day and realize I am that guy. That's awesome. One thing that kind of struck me as you were talking, Nick, was the idea that I feel like most of us, if not all of us, know what we have to do next. I think sometimes we really worry about like, what's the next step? And I think like ideas of specific things are sometimes hard. What should I focus on? Where should I go to school? What should I take this job? Should I, date this girl or whatever it is? Like, it's like, well, those are really big questions in and of themselves. But the general things, I feel like we always know what they are that we need to fix. Yeah, I'm waking up at 11 o'clock every morning. Well, you should probably fix that. You should probably, and you should fix it. Like, from when I've talked to people, they generally know what they need to start doing. Well, I never work out. Well, they know they should work out. But, or it's like, I'm really short with people. Or I don't really study very much. Well, everyone knows what they should do. I think a lot of it comes, and I have religious beliefs about, the Holy Ghost or the Spirit kind of telling you what you should do. And I whether you believe that or not, I really believe everyone knows that what they need to focus on, what they need to do. And I think that like everyone needs to take time to just kind of sit and think and try to really think out, like, what is it that I need to change right now that is kind of in the way of what I need to be doing? And then once you change that, it just becomes a progression. And it's funny because you'll talk to people that are really successful and they all have things that they are like, oh no, like I've got this I'm working on. One of the differences, though, is that really successful people recognize what they have to work on. They know they have to work on things, and they're usually actively working on them. Not unsuccessful people generally gloss over their faults in a lot of times, or they overly focus on them, but they don't have that kind of middle ground approach, and then they are not actively working on them. So I think that's what really differentiates people, and that's really one of the things for improvement.
That strikes a chord, man. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, the other day I was sitting and I realized that there was very few things pushing me out of my comfort zone, and that was making me feel like I'm not growing very much. And so I've started really looking into running this ultra marathon I've told you guys about. Not for any like glory or anything, but just to be like, I'm going to push myself so that I feel happier because I accomplished something. And so then I'll have added structure in my life. I think it's important that you do what you feel like you need to do.
Yeah. I love that. Actually, I was watching an interview with Conor McGregor before his Cowboy Cerrone fight.
Oh, yeah.
The one with Ari... Oh, I forget his last name.
Oh.
They've done interviews before. Ariel something.
Helwani or something?
Yeah, that seems right. It's kind of a strange last name.
Yeah.
Really cool guy, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they were right before the fight, and Ariel was like, so, listen, I've talked with the crew. They've never seen you this way since you were on your up and rising 2015 Conor. What happened? What'd you do? What's different this time around? And he goes, well, you know how there's always things that you should do and you shouldn't do? Well, I did them and I didn't do them. And that's the difference.
Yes.
I went back to what I knew I should be doing and I did it. I just did the thing.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Shia LaBeouf, man.
Oh, boy.
Just do it.
I'm going to put a clip in there.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly it. Just do
clip
it.
in the background.
Just do it.
Yes, I think it totally comes down to two. I think a lot of people. I'm gonna lump myself in here too, because I mean everyone can always get better. So I'm lumping myself in here too. A lot of people, I feel like they take a victim approach to life a lot of times. Like things aren't happening because I'm unlucky, because of this, because of that, because of this, because of that. They start blaming everything. It's like I didn't do well on the test because the test was hard. Because the teacher was bad, because this and because that. And the hard part about that is like sometimes like those are legitimate reasons, but I think it comes back to the whole, doing what you should do in order to, live a more fuller life, in my opinion, and a life of awesomeness, in my opinion. I don't know a better word to describe this, is to be a person of action where you take responsibility for whatever situation you're in, where, you don't take things personally. Yeah, things might be at fault. The teacher might not be a good teacher, but ultimately, it's a perspective change. It's instead of I'm going to sit around and blame the teacher for not teaching, and that's why I'm failing this class. It's, okay, I need to do a little bit of extra work to make this happen to pass the class. Or, in work, if, you have a crappy manager or something, it's like, okay, well, yeah, it is what it is. Crappy manager, you can blame all you want on him. What can I do to either find a new job or get a different manager or do different things? What the heck was that?
I have no idea. My computer just started making noise.
It's Stuxnet, man.
Yeah, I have no idea what that was. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I had checked something, but I thought my sound was off, and it wasn't making any noise before either. So.
That's funny. Anyway, but that's my take. Is taking responsibility, I think, is a big. It's hard to do, but it empowers you. It makes life a little more fulfilling, in my opinion.
I think that's such a great point of like the idea of taking responsibility. One approach that I have actually taken in life that for me it usually works is anytime you receive any kind of feedback, I usually believe it until it's proven wrong. True until proven false, basically. Because I think the natural human reaction is different. So if you get, kind of like you were saying, Caden, like if you get a test and the test is like, oh man, you did terribly, generally like what humans want to do is they want to like blame the test for being hard. Or you want to blame like, oh, well, obviously, like teacher didn't explain it well enough. It wasn't a well enough fleshed out thing. Like that's kind of the problem. But for me, I've tried to take the approach of I'm probably in the wrong here. And until I can prove that I'm in the right, I'm going to assume that I'm in the wrong. And that might be a bad mental approach for some people, but for me, that's really worked. Like if someone gives me correction and says, you really need to work on this, instead of saying, well, you don't know me, like I don't need to work on that, like this and this and this and this is why. It's like, well, okay, that might be true, but there's almost always a grain of truth in any feedback that you receive. So if somebody tells you, you do this wrong, well, they might be wrong and they might be biased and they might be all these things, but at the end of the day, it's really, there's usually a grain of salt or a grain of truth in there that you have to find and try to use to improve yourself. That's usually, that's worked for me at least.
Yeah, I think you have to, I do not use that approach. Because I think you get in trouble with that. And I like, you're pretty level-headed. Like I think you got to look at the source of what things are coming from too. Like if you take I'm trying to think of an example here. If you're getting criticism for this thing that you worked on, but it's from like a world expert, that is going to carry a very different weight than if it's just from some random Joe Schmo's opinion of how he thinks it should be done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that's an important distinction to make.
And that's one thing that I wanted to be clear about as well. And sorry if I came across as believe everything anyone tells you, but it's more of like believe it until it's proven wrong, in which case it's like some Joe Schmo might be like, oh, you're dumb. Like, why are you like, doing things that way? Well, they don't really have the knowledge and expertise that you do. But they also do have generally a different perspective where it's like, you know what, you can probably see ulterior motives behind them, or like maybe they just are jealous, or maybe they are just kind of that way. But sometimes you can dig in and be like, oh, wait, I actually am kind of like late to work, or I am kind of like short with people, and I didn't really think I was. And you know what, you're coming from the wrong place, that guy is, and I'm not going to believe everything you say, but okay, you know what? You might be right about something small here. That's kind of what I mean. You
give it like some weight in the back of your mind. That's like, okay, like noted. This comment is noted. He might be wrong. He might be right, but it's noted there. And then I think it's more like an aggregation of feedback. Like, okay, if somebody else says it now, like, okay, I really need to look at this. If you start moving along and you're like, okay, actually, hold on just a sec. I don't think he was right there. And I've actually found that in my life in many instances where, I will approach things from a very, I think traditionally it's very good to approach things from a very humble mindset, especially like when you're young, because people in the world, they know how the world works. In a business, it's like, okay, I'm not the one who's been running the business for 20 years. I should probably listen to these guys who've been running a business for 20 years, right? But there's a certain threshold where you realize, and I've come to realize this in some areas, where like your gut instincts are actually more right on than you think, but you're a little bit nervous because you feel like you're missing something. So it's like you'll be in a meeting or something, and people will be looking at a business process or doing something in some way that you think is like, okay, that's kind of weird that they're doing it like this. Like, this is kind of dumb, The traditional humble approach from me is like, okay, well, I'm missing something here. It looks easy on paper, but I must be missing something because these guys are experienced. Well, you do that enough times, you actually start to realize like, okay, wait a minute. Like, sometimes it's actually the other way where it's like, I am right. And it's about knowing when to roll with that confidence of I think I'm right here. I think my gut feeling is in the right direction where things are really overcomplicated and they need to not be overcomplicated, you know? And so I think it's a weird balance that I've found as I've been like kind of, you know, working at a job and, you know, kind of just going through life is like, okay, I approach everything from a humble mentality, but also realizing that my gut instincts are actually really good. And I think it takes time to figure out where that line is of where you are actually right. And it also takes a little bit of guts to say that too, you know, but I think it's important because eventually you're going to, you know, it's the taking action thing. Eventually it's going to be like, okay, like let's make a judgment call here. Something needs to give way or you need to make some decision and you need to have the confidence to either go with your gut or be humble enough to let somebody else make the decision. And you better hope that they're a smarter person that knows more than you. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I think it depends on the scope of the thing. And everyone knows that when you look at it. It's not like, oh, there's two types of decisions and da-da-da. It's not like that. You understand that when you go to accept that type of criticism or not, that there's different scopes of whether or not you should accept that and at what weight. Because when it's in like a very professional standing, it's much more of a good idea to listen first, talk second, that sort of thing. That's completely understandable. And as you grow more familiar with the situation, speaking your mind may or may not become an increasingly good idea.
Yeah.
When you decrease the scope away from things like that and towards things like yourself, the scope is very different. And in my opinion, that's where at least, I'm not even going to say I have an opinion on what one should or should not do. But I'll say that I know that in my personal experience, it's one thing, of course, for Joe Schmo to say something, and entirely another for someone very close to you to say something, good or bad, of course. Yeah. And I know that I've had people very close to me that will make assertions about my character that I completely disagree with. And even in those cases, I have learned that it is best to reduce the scope of their weighted opinion to the point where it is insignificant first and becomes more significant as you reconcile it with other people.
It's going back to that idea of keeping it within its domain of influence.
Exactly.
Not letting it get extrapolated
that is
to
exactly
other
it.
areas.
See it, and I think the only reason I said that is because it doesn't matter whether it comes from Joe Schmo or someone very close to you. Measure it the same way. Which is a hard thing to do, especially because you want to not do that at a very instinct level. But trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. That's what I'm getting at. Trust yourself first. When it's within that type of scope, when it comes down to yourself, trust yourself first. Make a note of someone else's doubting. And if that note starts to stack up, understand that you need to be self-aware enough to reconcile it with something else. Or disregard it entirely, because sometimes that's the answer.
I think that sometimes can be. My only issue is that I think sometimes self-awareness is a hard thing to quantify, and it's a hard thing to be aware of. If you're not self-aware, by definition, you don't know that you're not self-aware.
Yeah.
And so for me, that my biggest fear in life is that I'm not going to be aware of something that is very grievous and bothersome to people around me. And I think that's a large reason why I take on an approach of really believing a lot of the criticism and other things that I receive and then trying to prove it wrong, is because some of the worst things I've seen happen to people are because they're not self-aware. And so they think they are this or that way. They think that people are all their friends, and they think that these things are all lined up this way. And because they disregard this signs and criticism, they don't realize that they're really annoying people, or they don't realize that they are very, very like prideful and they're super self-centered. And because they just disregard that. And so I think for me, it's like I've weighed it between those two options, where it's like either I consign myself to not being self-aware and just living my life and totally stepping on toes without realizing it, or maybe I take it a little bit farther to where I believe more of the feedback I get from people, but at least then I'm well within a safe boundary where I'm not going to cast a wrong impression. I think that's where a lot of my background comes from. Not necessarily saying that that's right, but that's where a lot of my thought process is.
And I think that's an excellent thing. That's why I even wanted to say that is like, yeah, I don't have an opinion on what one should or should not do. You should do everything at once is the answer, because no matter what you learn, there are different ways to do things under different settings. Change the variables, and then all of a sudden what you should do changes quite rapidly.
It's such a complex equation, man. Can't quantify it, which is partially annoys me sometimes, all the, because it goes back to this is a very existential conversation. It goes back to like, what is reality? You only know reality to the extent that you can observe it, right? And the extent that you can observe it is from your unique perspective. So you don't know how much you don't know, right? Yeah. So it's like you're looking at reality. You're trying to make calculations based off of your view. Well, you don't know if you're seeing things, in full perspective, which none of us are. We're from our own unique perspective, which, I think people that are really self-aware understand that. But then you have to try to navigate it, So it's like, I don't know if I'm seeing 5% of the map or if I'm seeing 80% of the map, because based on that answer, I'm going to be a lot more confident moving forward if I'm seeing 80% of the picture here than if I'm seeing 5%. But you don't know which category you're in. You know what I mean? And so it's a weird situation to be in, where it's just like, at the end of the day, you just kind of gotta, I don't know what you call it. Just go for it. Go for it. Go with your gut.
I think you have to, because you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
No matter where you are in the ocean, the horizon always looks infinitely far away.
Yeah.
Even though maybe you've explored 90% of it, you just don't know it, because the horizon always looks infinitely far away.
Yeah.
And that's where you are. So you can't just stay where you are. So just go somewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to, sit there and do nothing, which is
even worse.
Well, and even in that realm, this kind of conversation makes me very sympathetic and a lot more understanding of people. Like, as human beings, often we'll see somebody that has some pretty significant shortcomings and faults and things where it's like, that's super annoying, or they do something that really bothers everyone and they don't really seem to do much to fix it. But for me, this makes me kind of more understanding for those types of people, because you realize no one is actually completely self-aware, and it's actually harder for that person. Because I've thought of people that, and dating is a hard one. Sometimes people in dating will go out and do things that are definitely not within the scope of what, not inappropriate things, but just kind of awkward, and just people that don't really know how to navigate that world very well. And sometimes, they'll get crap for it because they're not self-aware, or they don't really know how to navigate it right, and they're not successful, but at least they're doing something. And then it ends up usually that they find some success after a lot of work. And I think that that's how a lot of life is, kind of like what we're saying, you should do things, even if you don't really know if what you're doing is right, as long as you're making some form of progress and doing something, it's usually going to end up better for you, because and it makes me respect people that do things that are outside of their comfort zone and what they're good at, because it's just so much easier to stay within your comfort zone where you are more aware, and so that's some of my thoughts, I guess. I don't know if that's contributes much, but
this is a really deep conversation.
This is a great one, yeah.
Holy cow, this is juicy.
Are we feeling good? Feeling probably about
I
finished?
think I am. I'm feeling closure.
Yeah. So, point of the story: take responsibility, have confidence in your faculties, but be humble in every situation you come across, and build self-awareness.
Okay.
Just do all of that.
Just do all that all at once.
Just do it.